Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Shared Organics Show. Today was the most fun I've had talking about soil in a little while because we have Matt from Easy as Organics on the show today. And Matt is a living soil guy like myself. And I know a small percentage compared to somebody like Matt, and it was so much fun for me, selfishly, to be able to ask all of the burning questions that I had to provide as much value as we could around living soil. And there is so much that we could have dived down in. There's so many avenues to talk about in terms of managing living soil and all of the inputs. But I think Matt does an incredible job of simplifying the most important factors that we need to look at and talking about his journey building an impressive living soil product that he then gives out to facilities, to home growers, and all of this sort of thing. It's been so much fun to have a chat to him, and this episode is loaded with knowledge. So if you've got a pen and paper or something like that, if you're not driving or anything like that, then get your pen and paper out, or this might be one to listen to back again in the future because there's going to be some things that hit at different times that make a lot more sense when you're at that stage. But I'm so grateful to Matt for jumping in on this conversation. He's someone who I look up to very much, and I have no doubt that you're going to find some value from this conversation. So here we are. Here is Matt from Easy as Organics, and here is our conversation about living soil. Obviously, living soil, right, is something that you've been drawn to.
Yep.
What was it about, like, what were you seeing in terms of problems, or what were you seeing in terms of uh, a reason why you might have wanted to dive into living soil? Was there anything that kind of sparked that to go, hey, look, I think this is really important, and I think we need to go down this avenue?
Yeah, for sure. So there were a few factors. One of them really just having grown up around organic food. I was sort of raised by kind of hippie parents, I guess. I was always being fed organic food, and I rebelled against everything in my earlier days, and then as a- you know, in my adulthood, and started getting really into gardening again. My mum was a really good food grower, and that was sort of around as
Yeah.
a kid, um, as well as sort of growing up around farms. And then, I had, a good friend of mine in New Zealand who's an organic garlic farmer and a very, very talented soil food web guy. He was a bit of a trend bucker,
Yeah.
before it was cool or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know, there was just this weird moment we came over, and I was, having this sad attempt of just growing a lemon tree, for example.
Yeah.
And I was growing a bunch of leafy greens and peppers and zucchinis and things like that. And yeah, and he was like, "Man, this this tree here needs like a huge amount of nitrogen in organic form." And I had this big bag of chicken manure pellets. And he chucked like half the bag on there, 25 kilo bag, and going, "What are you doing? Like that's way too much." He's like, "No, it's cool." Cool, and then just threw heaps of mulch on it. And sure enough, like, for the next 5 years, this thing was just the most. I never had to do anything again other than water it occasionally. So there was that. I was also trialing different potting mixes at the time, and I found that just what was available on the market was it just all didn't seem like there was much efficacy there. I was
Hmm.
seeing just this real lack of plant vigor and health. I got onto some forums, and yeah, like many others, I discovered, this was in 2013 or something like that. Discovered, uh, yeah, some fantastic forums, Clackamas Coot, Mountain
Hmm.
Organics, and these guys were sharing some organic soil mixes that were based on, Cornell Institute mixes, and they sort of adapted them for the worm castings, especially that Clackamas Coot was making,
Hmm.
and so then I tried them out, and it was like, you know, light switch went off in my head. I was like, wow, this is cool, and I'd like to be able to um, provide this in some way to the public and form just straight away. I was like, yeah, it's a good business opportunity, and this is something I've instantly had a huge amount of passion for.
Hmm.
And yeah, and so yeah, from there it's just been quite a journey, a learning curve, which would probably segue into yeah some of the assumptions I guess that I had early on that I was sort of forced to face and learn to develop.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
my,
Tell me a bit about those. Like what's changed in terms of your thinking from when you started to now? Like, is there a couple of big things that have really shifted for you?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, so yeah, as mentioned, like yeah, in the early stages, I was making mixes that were like looking at a recipe book essentially, and you
Yeah.
make a mix. The, the the problem with that when you're approaching it from an organic perspective is that, we're trying to dial in fertility and trying to get this sort of consistent level of fertility for, plant availability, for healthy microbial activity, for stability. So it's not, the mix isn't just sitting there in this sort of anaerobic state, or it's not
Yeah.
just sitting there with nutrients that are sort of half nitrified, and
Hmm.
there's a bunch of unprocessed nitrogen and stuff like that. We want it stable, and I was just getting a lot of variability
Mm.
very, very quickly, after really just putting my head down and researching more, started reading a few of these sort of horticultural textbooks that were specific to formulating growing media. Then also started reaching out to people like Tad Hussey,
Hmm.
Brian Mason, Soil Doctor, because I was really impressed with some of the work they were doing overseas, and started seeing that they were, really just using a lot of data and science-driven decisions around how they were formulating and how they
Yeah.
were providing advice to other growers. So I started applying some of those principles of really just, I started with a soil test.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been soil testing before a lot, but I was having a hard time like translating that soil test that I was getting in Australian labs to something that really was relevant to what the plant needed
Hmm.
at the end of the day. So this is some pretty solid work that yeah, Tad Hussey, Brandon Hudson, Brian Mason, and these people in the US had really perfected in a way, and they
Hmm.
had a solid sort of methodology around using Logan Labs specifically and dialing in soil chemistry
Mm.
based on Logan Labs tests, Malik 3 standard soil test, and also saturated paste.
Yeah.
And look, EAL do similar tests as well, but Logan Labs have this sort of data set that's easily translated
Hmm.
into, something tangible that, with solid targets and things like that. So I was able to start to dial it in. But then what I found was, yeah, I was able to do that, but then I had to bring it all the way back to where I started, which was, well, hang on, uh, you know, I can do a lot better with the physical properties as well. And then I need to completely, you know, go back to drawing board in terms of looking at the biological, yeah, basically the biological and the physical component after I started realizing that, okay, I can dial this in from a chemical
Mm.
perspective, and biology is going to like that, and I'm going to get a good diverse sort of microbiome there.
Yeah.
However, what was happening was just for that huge portion of compost in my mix, it was just creating variability. So what I was able to do was just, bring that portion down a lot after trialing a lot of different composts. And that really helped. So just upping the amount of aeration and
Hmm.
peat to give me more stability. Then I was
Yeah.
able to control. the actual nutrient balance more.
Mhm.
And in turn, I think the microbial activity and the cycling time and everything of my soil became more predictable,
Yeah,
and I was
okay.
able to get a bit more stability from there. And yeah, in turn, um, it just got a lot easier too. I noticed in during veg, seedling clone veg stage, just faster, healthier growth instead of having to sort of really wait around for quite a while
Yeah.
for plants to establish, which I was sort of used to. I was getting
Yeah,
much
okay.
more sort of vigorous early growth.
There's a couple of things if I may jump in to click on there, I could dive down. That's really fascinating having obviously using the soil test and stuff is really good because you can understand what is in there, but it's not always directly related to what the plant can uptake and what will eventually
Mm,
be in the plant. And that also changes from when you've poured a fresh bag in compared
yeah.
to a couple of years down the track. And having like I try and tell people that we don't want to be throwing the soil out. We want to be improving the soil over time and using the same soil, and that's where the structure and the actual makeup of the soil becomes really important, doesn't it? Because
Mm,
you don't want to have just solid organic matter because then that's going to compress, going to become anaerobic over time. It's just you want to have this medium that is going to translate in the long term and then have that, like you said, from the get-go, a good microbial population and access to all of these nutrients, but also having that stable so that it can last and it is going to mimic somewhat of a soil system out in nature. Um, there's a few questions, but one of the questions that comes to mind then is, what do you like? What was the main challenge in trying to find a soil? Like obviously you're taking what some others have done before and they've done a lot of the groundwork and that's great.
mm.
But you're having to adapt this for an Australian market, finding a compost that it's so hard to find compost that's
Yeah.
um, solid and the same and repeatable as well. And a lot of the potting mixes and the compost that we see, done generically are sterilized. There's no life in them. There's no to get that continuity, they sterilize them, and it's not really a compost anymore. It's not a living thing. So, can you tell me a bit about the challenges for just going into that compost again, how you manage to find something that's consistent that you know is going to be repeatable. And then secondly, building a structure or something that and talk about how that changes over time from
Yeah.
when you first use it to a couple years down the track.
Yeah, cool. So starting with the compost thing, um, so now I have at the moment I've got a solid formula, and it gets manufactured by a large growing media manufacturer because it's a very reliable
Yeah.
formula. But for the first 5, 6 years or whatever, yeah, I was making everything myself. So I had a very
Wow.
close relationship with all the suppliers, as well as a very um, very detailed oversight of all of the materials I was working with.
Hmm.
Um, Selecting those inputs. I'm going off a little sidetrack, but we'll come
That's
back
okay.
to what we're
Yeah.
talking about. So, selecting these inputs, um, it's very important to me that they were the cleanest in terms of heavy metal
Hmm.
or other undesirable elements that are
Yeah.
going to interfere with the uptake of other plant nutrients or potentially be hazardous for human health. So we've selected inputs based on their lowest heavy metal content and highest efficacy. And that's, all of the inputs.
Yeah.
But compost is by far the most challenging one. Like
Yeah.
everything else is okay, it has to be the right physical properties, and we just need it the cleanest. And on average, they're going to contain X amount of nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, or whatever.
Yeah.
With compost, the in especially in Australia, because I've seen manufacturers in the US and Europe that make these perfect composts that are literally designed for horticulture or for agriculture, for whatever, for whatever
Yeah.
purpose. But what I was finding here was that, you know, company A would just make a compost and company B would just make a compost. And they would both say that their compost is the best compost. And I'm not even talking about the large scale commercial uh,
Yeah.
waste management sort of
Oh yeah, yeah,
systems where, look, there is a place for that and that's important. And I'm sure that some of them are doing a great job and that there's a place for that. But, when we're talking about high quality um, growing media that has good efficacy, we need to use compost that ticks a number of boxes, like,
yeah.
so I had to start looking for compost manufacturers that were paying close attention to the moisture.
Hmm.
So many of them were just too dry, especially down in Victoria. It's a very dry climate, and especially in the summer months, we are ending up with compost that, I'm sure maybe they were trying, but it just kept getting stopped in its
Yeah.
tracks. So the thermophilic, processes that start to happen when producing a compost just end up halting
Yeah.
and you get
Mm.
this unfinished material and biology that maybe isn't best for the actual growing stages of plants and they're more for it's more like what you would see at the breakdown of organic material that is not
Yeah.
necessarily you know good for actually growing plants. And yeah, so the majority of compost I was finding was just this sort of unfinished compost, and I think
Yeah.
it came down to a cost thing as well. Like a lot of the manufacturers just didn't want to spend the time required to properly finish these things. It takes
Hmm.
a lot of work, takes a lot of time,
It does.
um, and then they would argue that in order to actually do that, to spend at least 8 months or something, would require more work or more labor than what they had access to. So
True.
I ended up finally sort of uh, choosing a compost that was very, very low in sodium and chloride,
Beautiful.
which I was finding a real hard time with other composts. So yeah, the one we've landed on is extremely low in sodium and chloride. It's low in nutrients across the board, but it doesn't matter. We just needed the sort of organic matter and the biology and the humus
Hmm.
and whatnot. And then we would amend that growing media to where we needed it for, ultimate really plant health,
Hmm.
um, and to feed that sort of soil biology for slow release nutrients over a plant cycle. We could dial that in using amendments as opposed to having this really hot, you know,
Yeah.
high nutrient content compost that takes a lot of that control away,
Hmm.
especially if we're adding compost to like 20 or 30%, you end up with the situation where, yeah, you just got no control and it's going to change from batch to batch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the, selecting these inputs is in Australia, it's very reliant on, it varies from place to place. So, what I've actually found is that a lot of the minerals that we need for these mixes, such as lime and gypsum and soft rock phosphate, things like this. Yeah, I've actually found the minerals up in the Queensland area to be very clean,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
in
Luckily.
comparative to other places. Yeah. Um, so, going down the rabbit hole of heavy metals testing, that's been very interesting because in a way that sort of it shows you a bit of a snapshot of, where that came from, the potential contamination in those areas,
Hmm.
and it sort of has allowed me to kind of guide where I go in terms of input selection. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and so yeah, again, coming down to the actual mix as well, and dealing with Australian conditions being very, very hot a lot of the time. Um, the heat isn't such a bad thing with a fresh mix because your soil is going to cycle pretty quickly
Yeah.
and be ready, to grow in within say 2 or 3 weeks from mixing. And the cold temperatures make it very challenging because that
Yeah.
slows the
Slows it all down.
nitrification down incredibly. So you end up with, the bulk of the nitrogen still in ammonium form for like a
Mm.
good month or 6 weeks, until it could even be until, yeah, grower ends up putting it in their container in warmer conditions and watering it. And you've got roots, and then it
Yeah.
starts to finish cycling. So yeah, what one of the big challenges is us just getting that to sort of completely cycle,
Yeah,
in
ready out the
manufacturing.
box type thing.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Are you just quick question on that. You're not using any worm castings in your mix, eh? It's all just that compost.
Yeah,
Um,
we ended up going for just the compost and that portion of the mix. Yeah, I love worm castings. What I've found again, the variability in the worm cast because we did end up really focus we focused on viability for commercial operators as well as home growers. And so again, we really were trying to formulate with KIS Organics
mhm.
uh, a, a mix that would be a viable option for commercial operators.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the things I was finding is that, yeah, worm castings an incredible input to add as a grower, and treat it as an amendment and
Hmm.
a sort of a biological inoculant, source of
Yeah,
humus, plant available nutrients. And when applied, it has that effect. And I was finding just by mixing it in, high quantities into the soil mix, yeah, again, I was struggling just to keep things like sodium and chlorides and heavy metals and all these things. You just don't need to use much worm castings to get a huge amount of benefit for it.
true. Yeah.
So that was just a decision I made to go steer more towards the stability side of
Mm.
things as opposed to,
Yeah, and
just
you're coming from
cramming it
a
with.
oh yeah, you're coming from a like obviously you're generating a product that you want to have this repeatability and this reliability. So like it isn't to say that you can't go and use
Mm,
worm castings as your portion of the mix. And
yeah,
if it's like you said with the input selection, if you're getting a good quality compost that you're happy with, or you're getting good quality worm castings and things like this, people can use that in their mix and they're going to still get a
sure.
really good result. I did a lot of so I've got two products that I started making for myself initially, and then for the community, and then I sort of just sell these on the side as a little bit of an aside, as well. Like I've got an amendment mix and a cover crop seed mix, and I was looking because I wanted to get local Australian sourced stuff, finding people that had got good quality inputs and that were locally sourced. And then it's more about for me teaching people what they are and why and where they can source their own rather than saying, buy from me. But the inputs themselves, like you said, having to really do that quality control initially to make sure that what is going in is really
Mm,
important, I think is the message that
yeah, yeah.
is a really good message to say. Like you're just, focusing
Mm,
on the quality of the input to start with means that you're not polishing a turd, as they say, and you're
100%. And then, yeah, so like, yeah, bring it back on track, like translating this to say the home grower, the home gardener that's just trying to find out where they can get, either purchase good quality compost or castings or make their own, um, because the purpose of this is that you're trying to grow the healthiest, most vigorous,
yeah.
nutritious, whatever plants that you're trying to grow. Yes, these are some of the things to look out for. Like some of the things I mentioned, compost manufacturers, make sure they can supply you with an analysis.
Yeah.
Hit me up or whatever if you want to know what some of the targets ranges
Yeah,
are that
cool.
that mean it's quality. But yeah, you want to see you like look if they give you an analysis that also includes heavy metals, that's great. It
Yeah.
means they care and it means they're trying to do a good job. But you want to see carbon to nitrogen ratio that's not crazy high or crazy
Hmm.
low, and yeah, just a few of these things that are in range. But also ask them what it's made from, like what are the source materials,
Mm.
and um, depending on your application, you might not want to use a extremely uh, manure rich or like horse manure rich
Hmm.
or based compost. You might want to use something that's maybe a little bit more on the plant-based end, or if it is say just a straw manure-based compost, it might be perfect for you're brewing teas and you want some really, really diverse source of biology to
Yeah.
say make compost tea, then a straw manure based compost is going to be like the best for that
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same with and worm castings in my mind is like, plant superfood. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you know, you want to add, you want to apply worm castings, in my opinion, and, use it as a source of biology for compost tea or even just apply it directly. And again, with worm castings, that's probably the most important one because it's cold.
Yeah.
You aren't. So, one of the benefits with the thermophilic compost is that, yeah, when it does go through the thermophilic phase, when it heats up to say 60 degrees Celsius for a little while there, and then it gets turned again, and it heats up and it turns again, and it heats up a little bit less, and then a little bit less, and less, 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 until it's in its mesophilic stage, and now it's like stable. But
Yeah.
during that thermophilic stage, one of the benefits is that it does essentially get rid of things like weed seeds, and it also
Mm.
does get rid of some of the more pathogenic organisms that you may not want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then as it matures, now you're gonna, grow a healthy, diverse population of biology, including, like fungi, lots of protozoa, and everything
Yes.
else. Um, so, if that compost isn't mature enough, you're gonna struggle.
Yeah, but the worm
For
castings,
any.
it's already done, isn't it? They've gone through that the worms have done that for you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
essentially.
Sorry, yeah. So exactly. So with the compost, if it's been done right, you're going to have a pretty clean material. With the castings, you want to be very certain that they're using good starting materials. Like
Yes.
dairy cow manure is an excellent source for casting. So if any manufacturer said, that makes worm castings says, hey, this is made on a bed of dairy cow manure, that's great. Most of
Right.
them use horse manure, which can or can't be good depending on where the horses were grazing. If they were
Hmm.
grazing in Roundup fed pastures or whatever, like horses don't um, process the various compounds that are going through the gut like a cow
Yes.
does.
Yeah.
So just think of things like that, when you're selecting worm castings, particularly like it is cold. So, and being that it's cold, a cold compost, it's going to have incredible microbial population, but it's also, yeah, you just want to make sure that those starting materials are clean and
Yeah.
come from, yeah, good source.
Exactly right. Yeah, getting the source right. We'll come back to that question about structure that I asked in a bit, but just going down this amendments pathway because, as I said, I got an amendment blend, which is
Mm,
I would say heavily influenced by Jeremy at Builder Soil's product, and it's a split between rock minerals, so sort of your rock phosphates. I get like the palagonite from Mount Sylvia up here in
mm,
Queensland, these types of things. And then it's also, you've got your kelp, we've got neem, we've got all sorts of things like that in there as well. When it comes to like amendments,
mm.
um, and adding in amendments, and I know you said you use your amendments to build your soil and sort of bulk it out with some stuff. I'm aware that a lot of people don't know about the different inputs that you can use, and a lot of what my mission is to try and help people understand what these inputs are, why we're selecting them. We're bringing, and I essentially say we're bringing some of the best organic sources of these nutrients and putting them all in one place and allowing the biology to work that in a way that it knows how to do very efficiently rather than going through the chemical route and
Yep.
synthetics. Um, and helping people understand that they can use some of these to either mix through their soil, to top dress through, to run through your worms, run through your compost, all of the above.
Mm.
Uh, a couple of things. One, what would you say is probably the go-to, apart from worm castings and compost, because we touched on that, it's a really good balance of stuff. But in terms of inputs in that regard, what are some of the things that people are missing and or overrated, underrated? And then also, is there a point at which you can over amend soil and overdo it with that kind of thing?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. You can definitely over amend.
Yeah. Hey guys, really quickly, jumping in, I just want to remind you if you are not subscribed to this show, that is the number one thing that you can do to show me your support. So if you're finding value from this conversation and you're deeply engaged, I would love you to hit the follow or subscribe button. All right, back to the show.
Yeah, so sorry, going back to the first part of
I know, I'm
your
sorry,
your
I asked lots
question.
of
So yeah,
questions.
some like yeah, no, so my opinion about some of these food sources and having worked for a long time, these are raw materials that have been selected based on what people before us have found have been excellent sources of organic nutrition that are ideal for a biologically active type of soil that
Yeah,
are going to be, that those nutrients are going to be cycled into an available, a form that's available to the plant over time. And some of these materials are going through, with the help of biology, are going to allow these nutrients to be available over different release periods.
yes.
So a lot of the reason why, like people like yourself and companies like mine make some of these amendment mixes. And so, like, I mean, with mine, like I'm thinking about, um, different sources of nitrogen, different amendments to provide different sources of nitrogen that's going to provide uh, varying rates of release over a period of time.
Hmm.
So if I were to just say put one amendment in it, yeah, great. It's an awesome organic amendment. However, it is one source and your plant is going to be able to access the nitrate in its final form from that material, in a sort of shorter window. Whereas, if I can add a
Yeah.
few different sources, then now we've not only are we, so we're so we're increasing the diversity of that nutrient in organic form. We are then allowing that nutrient to be available over a longer period of time in different rates. So, like fish meal, for example, you're going to get some nitrogen that's going to be available a bit quicker, a bit more
Yeah.
immediate. Um, and then something, yeah, like you're saying, neem meal. I mean, that's going to take much longer.
Yeah.
Or say lucerne or uh, soy meal is quite fast. So when you're starting to think of some of these materials, just do a little bit of research about how long it takes for
That's a
the
good point.
nitrogen component. Look at how much nitrogen by percentage is in some of these inputs
Yeah.
and how long it's going to take roughly for that to release.
Hmm.
And that's why those are the reasons why I select some of the inputs that I've
Yeah.
selected. So, and I think that's those are the main benefits of these sort of systems where you do all the work up front. You're preparing for a complete crop cycle by preparing your soil with these sort of materials so that over time, as they slowly break down, or quickly and slowly, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
and especially these, the minerals, things like soft rock phosphate is going to very slowly
Yeah.
release phosphate uh, over the long period of time, and that's going to provide you know um, availability of these uh, material of these minerals over long, say,
Hmm.
crop cycles, and so then we can just do just very minimal supplementation and
Yeah.
biological stimulants and things like that. Focus on training our plants properly, focus on IPM.
Yeah.
It frees the grower up to
It does
be able
certainly.
to
And
just focus
if
on
you've got
planting.
a
Yeah.
if you've got a bigger battery of soil as well, like a larger volume, you're gonna be mitigating a lot of these availability issues that come in
Mm,
because talk about the plant outpacing the biology in the soil. I'm actually running an experiment on my YouTube at the moment, which has been really interesting. It's about 18 months in. I took a an organic chili seeds, grew up all the chili seeds, picked the best one, grew it up into a mother plant, took clones,
mm,
and then I ran those clones, well, I am running the clones in the most sterilized, awful, cheap potting mix that I could find on the market. Um, and I did three different ones. So one, I was no fertilizer, nothing at all, just leave it in that potting mix. And that died very quickly.
yeah,
Which was,
yeah,
I
they do.
mean, obviously,
Yeah.
if we know about that. So then the second one I used, again, the most cheapest basic NPK synthetic fertilizer, which is still going, but does not look healthy at all because it gets this when the water goes through it, it's super available, shoots out the gate, but then is coming into so many problems
mm,
post that. Because there's no biology in the soil. We're not adding any biology. There's no compost, anything like that. Obviously, slowly over time, things will happen. But
mm,
um, the second one, I'm using just my amendment mix. And what's been really interesting is that initially, I didn't get a huge amount of growth out of that, as much as the initial NPK because, it's water soluble, it's available quickly in the NPK, so it was being used and growing this nitrogen plant. But now, when it's come to actually creating chilies, it can't do it very well.
mm.
Whereas the blend is now showing that it's a much healthier plant, much better chilies. And then with that third one that died, I then decided to repot the mother plant in there and then show how we can improve that soil with all the living soil techniques. And
Yep.
that mother plant is an absolute monster compared to the other two because not only am I feeding it the blend, but I'm putting in biology as well to be able to break down those nutrients. Things like the mycorrhizal fungi to go and access and get that phosphorus out. All of the things that might not be happening without the biology. So my point in bringing this up is that yes, you can put some of these amendments in, and yes, they do have some biology within them and around them and from these sources. But if we're not focusing on the biology in the soil, then these inputs might not even get broken down at all. They might just be sitting in the soil for a long time. Um,
Yep.
is that something that you battled with, or is obviously that goes backwards and forwards with the testing and what amendments you're putting in, and then seeing how that iterates over time?
Yeah. So, um, sorry, I'm just thinking about the best way to answer this because
That's okay.
I,
I'm interested on your
I
thoughts on
know,
it.
yeah, I did have a good think. So, one of my observations, over time, a lot of time of doing this and countless soil tests and working in a commercial facility for a little while with living soil and having to, test numerous crop cycles and things like that. Is that if you so when starting with a high quality living soil that it's everything's there that's required in a fairly good balance. You can assume the biology's there. You can just smell it. It's got some moisture to it. You plant a plant in there, the plant's healthy. You know,
Yeah,
we can assume that there is a healthy, diverse kind of ecosystem of soil cycling
yeah,
biology and whatnot. Um, Over time, if you're amending correctly and feeding that soil correctly, your microbes will flourish and they will continue to, their populations aren't going anywhere. If anything, they just explode, right?
yeah,
What I've found is that um, if I dial in, if I focus on, say, the chemical and the physical, because I know that my compost is good, so I know that my source of microbes are good, then the biology tends to follow.
yeah,
And then, at that's my baseline, right? But then from that baseline, okay, I know that I've got a good balance of nutrients, I've got healthy plants, my soil isn't compacted, all that. Then if I want to apply some biological treatments such as a good compost tea or say some
mhm,
bacillus to
yep,
help speed up nutrient cycling and protect plant roots,
yep,
roots from pathogens and things like that. It's it's going to have a really explosive result on yield, plant health, plant resilience, all that sort of
mhm,
stuff. Whereas if I'm throwing biology at a subpar mix with subpar nutrient content and sort of low airfill porosity and low levels of even organic matter. Well, organic matter is a tricky one to measure in a growing media, but
yeah,
low levels of humus and low levels of nutrients or out of balance nutrients, particularly. So high magnesium, calcium,
Yeah,
or high
yeah.
levels of sodium and things like that, then I'm just going to struggle
Mm,
regardless of what biology I throw at it. So, and what I've come to learn over time is that it really is about making sure you're not neglecting one thing for another, making
mm,
sure you're always thinking about all these three things,
yeah.
because with that comes good. When you start thinking about all three of them, you start thinking about watering practice and like watering so that you're not letting dry pockets start to appear in certain areas of your container or bed,
Hmm.
which are going to grow and cause these like completely dead areas of your soil. And
Yeah.
you want the moisture dialed in just right because there's a sweet spot there for that biology to, the biology that we want that's going to continue to cycle nutrients into a plant available form and to promote a healthy root zone that's not going to promote pathogenic organisms from flourishing in the root zone.
Yeah.
So, we want to be amending the right amount of amendments
Mm,
that is not going to, increase salinity to the point of where it's going to then start just being, harmful
yeah.
to not just microbes, but even, yeah, plant roots as well.
Yeah.
Because it's another thing to think about, you know, yeah, these are organic amendments, but they've all got salts. They are
Yes.
salty.
Especially
They have
especially
salt,
ocean
and
ingredients.
yeah, exactly. So just bear that in mind. Like, look at the sort of maximum recommended application rates and sort of work backwards from there. Because a lot of the time, I know with my product anyway, like the maximum amount is recommended for completely depleted soil, and most of
Mm,
us don't completely deplete our soil, right?
true, true.
So just yeah, and then experiment, so work backwards from there. Like, okay, here's the maximum amount that we recommend for depleted soil. What do your plants look like at the end?
Mm,
Were they totally faded and all the leaves are falling off, or are they still pretty healthy, got fairly green leaves still, really, really good yield? I'm assuming that it's landed in a good place,
yeah, yeah.
soil fertility wise. So we might not need to add too much more to get it back to
Mm,
where we want it for the next cycle.
true. And
So
yeah, because
using your intuition a bit.
what I'm hearing from you there is like thinking about balance, obviously, and then it all coming down to the chemistry at the end of the day as well, like having too much salinity or having too much nitrogen or whatever it is, can shut down a whole bunch of other minerals and throw the balance out. So no matter what biology you have in there, if it's in the wrong ratios and things like this, or something's in there too hot, then it's just gonna impact and impede a lot of the other
Yeah.
things that are going on.
Yeah.
And Graham Sate talks about the interplay between minerals, microbes, and humus as being what you're trying to basically, which is similar to what you just said. It's trying to balance these different elements so that they're efficiently working together. It's not, you don't want too much of one thing and not enough of another.
Mm,
Um, so then going to structure, mate, in the soil, and coming back to that question about, I've just bought a beautiful bag of living soil from you, and I've used it in a pot or something, container, whatever it is. Um, how does it change from when I've just dumped it in to say a couple of years down the track? And what challenges did you face in terms of what that looked like? And I'll just give you a little example of something I'm thinking about in terms of people that use an aeration component like perlite, where it
mm,
raises to the top eventually. And
mm,
I've used rice hulls quite often in my mixes that I've done in the past. And even though like it's a great form of silica, but it does break down. So then eventually that aeration component has gone. So
mm.
can you just talk to a couple of those things for me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, if I were to say use 100% of the aeration component as perlite, I think it would probably move around a bit too much and the mix would just generally be a little bit too light.
Hmm.
Yeah, if we're looking purely at physical properties, we're looking at the overall airfield porosity, uh, of the mix, and that includes the grade of substrate, the peat substrate that we
Hmm.
use. We, of course, are not just using like seed raising grade of peat. It's very well, it has different components. So we've got sod as well as milled in the recipe that we use because that allows the um, peat itself to actually contain a fair bit of air in there.
Yeah, okay.
It's very important because, if it really, really fine peat or cocoa is going to, be very restrictive in terms of air porosity when you scale up into a large container or raised bed.
Yeah.
Biochar as well helps. The kind of compost that we use, this horticultural compost, it's pretty, it's got a nice sort of airy sort of feel to it. There's some chunks of like little small chunks of wood still in there
Yeah.
and things like that that just allow for a bit more air instead of just becoming completely like this fine humus. Like there's humus in the fines, but it's not 100%
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
humus. So and that actually helps for the container sort of structure.
Yeah.
And then so with the perlite, so yeah, we use perlite, but we use it in sort of a bit of a mix of perlite and some lava rock or scoria,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
that kind of just helps maintain that aeration in a more stable structure. So it keeps it in place and stops it from moving around, stops the perlite from moving around a bit too much.
Yeah.
And then
True.
again, like quite a while back, I used to use just lava rock or just scoria. It was too heavy,
It's
and it
so
actually
heavy.
held on to too much water. It's
Oh,
yeah,
right.
it had this bizarre sort of water holding properties. So what I found is the balance between the perlite and the score I really liked. And pumice is just it's not economically viable.
Yeah.
We bring
Expensive.
it over from New Zealand,
Yeah.
and it's a rock.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
I've got
yeah,
some
I'd love to, but yeah.
well, exactly. It's for you. This is what I wanted to just touch on in that regard is that you're coming from a business standpoint where your shipping is a massive thing for you. So like that's why a lot of people use perlite in their mixes because of the shipping capabilities. So they can it's
Hmm.
less weight to ship around.
So I'm
Uh,
going to be honest though, like if I were to say the business had nothing to do with it and I was just making it for myself, like I wouldn't have a problem with using
yeah,
perlite.
okay,
And I,
cool,
I I
cool.
think everyone's a little bit different, and that's totally cool. That's one of the things I love about this industry is everyone has different, idea. It's such a vast kind of industry in terms of
Yeah.
what you can do and how you can make mixes and where people how people approach it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, what we use in our mixes, a lot of different things work.
Hmm.
Um, I, I'm sure, yeah, look, hummus is awesome, but again, it is still expensive. And like, even if I was making it myself at home, I'd probably still use just a bit of perlite and
Yeah.
maybe some pumice, like mix them together, just like what I'm doing with scoria.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of nice. Again, like I like the diversity as well, just getting
Same.
some different grades of aeration.
Hmm.
I don't think it's 100% necessary, but for me, for my mix, I think it's worked well. Biochar is another really, really,
Yeah,
yeah,
awesome.
highly recommend it for long-term, not just long-term structure, but long-term buffering,
Yeah.
stability. It provides a habitat for biology as well as a, micro porous, uh, it's sort of honeycomb structure that allows for nutrients to be held in place and
Mm,
exchanged, uh, you know, for the plant when required, as well as there's quite a bit of research out there that shows its efficacy in uh, remediating heavy metals and
mm,
other toxins.
yeah.
So it's going to reduce the level of which your plants uptake heavy metals and potentially other harmful compounds.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think biochar is an awesome input. It's
Yeah.
an expensive input, uh,
But you can also make it
but
yourself, I
we think
suppose.
it's worth it. You can,
You just got
yeah.
to
It's funny.
pre-charge it, don't you?
Yeah, you got to pre-char. I think the actual production of the biochar after seeing so the biochar that we get is made commercially, with this crazy pyrolysis machine. It's quite impressive,
Yeah,
and
awesome.
it's actually made. It's it's produced with some heat. Uh, it's from the excess heat of barley malting manufacturing process, and so
Okay.
they're using the heat from malting barley at a barley malt, and then they've created this huge production line off of that to create biochar, and the biochar feedstock that
Amazing.
we use is made from walnut. Now, sometimes pecan, depending on but it's only those two feedstocks and never anything
Wow.
else. It's only those two, so it's extremely consistent, and it's actually a little bit higher in nutrient content than regular.
Okay.
So not dissing. I love pine based biochar. I think it's really good. Um, uh, but you definitely need to charge that. Whereas I've found with the walnut based stuff, yeah, I've always been able to just throw it in the mix, and then it just, as a result of cycling over with the rest of my soil mix, it tends to, that's where the charging seems to
Yeah.
happens. It's fun.
Biochars are great. That's such a great input. That's really, really cool. I'm just cognizant of time. There's a couple of things I want to touch on before we wrap up. Just going back to that thing in terms of like over time using the aeration amendments
Mm.
and things once they've broken down, what do you think changes over time in terms of is there anything that people
Yep.
can do to keep that aeration component, the oxygen in the soil that we need, and all of that over time? And how does your mix last over time that you found?
Yeah, yeah. So no, this is a good question. A lot of my customers are growing with this soil long term. Some of my commercial clients, they're in large raised beds.
Yeah,
They're relying on, the fact that they can have continual, perpetual cycles over and over again.
yeah,
So, yeah, obviously the physical properties are important to enable that goal. I would, yeah, again, I would suggest, if you're making your own mix, make sure that you're using a good aeration component because, yeah, if that does start to break down over time, you are going to have a more and more difficult time with plant health and consistency. If we're looking at, say, commercial production, where consistency is extremely important, that's going to become a problem, say, a couple of years down the line, where now all of a sudden everything is slowing down, your yield is decreasing and everything because your plants they simply can't take up nutrients and with the same level of efficiency that they did, at the start.
mm,
So if translating that back to the home garden, I mean, it's the same sort of thing, right? It's like, well, 2 years down the line, I mean, you want to have a similar nutrient density and quality of whatever food it is in herbs that you're growing, whether they're medicinal plants, herbs, food. 5 years, like yeah, you should be able to use a soil mix like this for 5 years, definitely without issue. And I think another major factor with getting longevity and consistent results over time really watering, like proper watering and potentially sort of mulching and adding protective layers and things like that on top, and
yes,
um, you know good irrigation and watering practices is going to help a lot. You'd be surprised how much or how little water this sort of soil needs, depending on the stage of plants at and the
mm,
environment. So just really, it's not a schedule, and this is one of the misconceptions I see from growers that are sort of starting out. They think, oh, if I just water every second day, it'll be
yeah,
fine, or once a day, or once a week, or whatever it is, right? And it's dynamic. It's what is required. You want to
yeah,
try to maintain some level of consistency. You can allow some dryback and things like that, but um, the water requirements of that plant are obviously going to change over time. Same with the soil, based on how hot, dry, humid it is, and what stage your plants are in. The demand for water is going to rapidly increase as your plant, the root mass increases in that container or raised bed.
true.
Just keep an eye on that, and if you if you get it, that'd be one of the things I'd really focus on in terms of skill as a grower, because over time, if you have a good handle on that, then you'll get much more out of your soil for a very much,
Yeah,
much
I've
longer
found
period of time.
using moisture meters very helpful because I can
Yeah.
see, because like you said, it's very difficult to guess unless you know the plant very well and you can see
Mm,
the signs. It's very difficult to just go, okay, well, within my busy schedule, when do I water? How much am I putting in? What percentage volume am I putting in? And having a moisture meter in there where I know I've just got to keep it within a certain range, that's much more helpful for me because I kind of go, oh, that's fine. It's still within range. It's still happy. I don't need to go in and dump a whole bunch of water, which could
exactly.
be a terrible result if
Mm,
you go and do it. Hey,
absolutely. No, look, yeah, moisture meter. I have moisture meters in my pots outside here. I've always used blue mat digital
yeah,
moisture meters. You know, when I was at a commercial facility, we used barometers, which are cool, but they're really expensive and they're a
yeah,
bit fiddly. Blue mat digital moisture meters are just amazing because they are essentially tensiometers, and it's a measurement of what a plant root is feeling in
mm,
terms of the amount of pressure required to. It's a measurement of plant available water in the
yeah,
root zone, and that is just such a useful data point for a grower because if we're looking at volumetric's useful for me, say as someone that's like building soil, and I need to know how much water by percent of volume that I'm adding to
hmm
that's mixed to get to say 40% or whatever.
yeah,
You know, whereas when I'm growing, a uh, I want to use a tensiometer because now that's going to tell me what the plant is seeing,
yeah.
and they can vary. I mean, there's definitely an association between the two, but the tensiometer is going to give you a much easier sort of metric to go by. So if you get, if any of your listeners, that find a Blue Mat digital moisture meter somewhere, I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah,
Honestly, it's a
great
game
company.
changer. You put that thing in your soil, and it's going to tell you in the water. Just keep between 50 and 100 or something like that. Don't get too crazy with it. And the
Yeah.
beautiful thing about it is that if you do keep it within that range, you'll then start to notice correlation between that and the health of your soil and your plants. And
Mm,
then it sort of trains you almost to how to properly water.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, Blue Mat's a great company. I've used some of their carrots when I've disappeared over for a holiday or something, and
Yeah.
I've needed some consistent sort of watering through their little carrot systems, which seemed to work well. It did. I feel like I didn't have enough carrots for the size of the soil volume, so there was a few little bits of dry back pockets
Yeah.
when I returned. But these are minor details. You mentioned also like in terms of the watering conservation and stuff like that, having like a mulch or a some sort of covering on the soil.
Hmm.
I talk about obviously again with the cover crop blend that I've talked about, like that's a cover crop is just incredible for building soil and covering the soil and for providing so many
Yeah.
benefits in the root zone for breaking down the nutrients and all of that sort of thing. But in terms of mulch and watering and water conservation, um, it can be very different in the climates. Australia, massive country, same as the US, obviously big country, different ecosystems all over the place. Uh, how how, um, how challenging is it for you to have developed a mix that works across different climate zones? And is there a difference in terms of how people should be protecting that soil versus someone like me, where we're getting some scorchingly hot, humid days versus somebody that's freezing cold and dry,
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. Obviously, the watering amount will be different, and if you're using a moisture meter, it's much more helpful. You can kind of see that. But what comes to mind when I talk about the differences in the climates and how that impacts the soil itself?
Yeah. So like basically, I mean, yeah, if you're growing outdoors in Australia, mulch is critical.
Yeah.
Like you almost can't do it without it. I mean, you can, but yeah, you're gonna struggle because like especially if we're bringing it back to containers, you want the most out of that container, and straight away without mulch, now you've pretty much lost 25-30% of that soil volume just to
Mm,
the top part of it being completely dry and
yeah.
lifeless,
Yeah.
and nothing is now usable in the top, the
Yeah.
upper horizon of the soil because it's really dry. So yeah, it all depends on your application. So for the average, say, home gardener, home grower, yeah, just get some straw. One thing I've noticed, like up here in Brisbane, is like, I found a problem actually all over the country, but it's really hard to just get like a coarse, more coarse grade of straw mulch. It doesn't just break down so quickly. Like every mulch product here, it seems to be very fine.
Hmm.
So what happens is it just, I don't know, it just sort of like incorporates into the soil and breaks down quite quickly. So just be aware of that. If you can find something that's a little bit more on the core side, it'll just help that separation a bit more and just keep it up on top and stop it from
Yeah.
kind of incorporating in the soil too much, and it will last longer. Look, I've used wood chips in the past, bark, straw. They all do the same thing. They just have different rates of breakdown. I do really like using wood chips, but it can be a total rabbit hole of like getting the right ones or
Yeah.
whatever. But don't worry about like drawdown and stuff like that too much. I mean, at the end of the day, it's at the top. If you
Hmm.
don't overdo it, it's not going to
Yeah.
compete with nitrogen and whatnot from the microbial breakdown. You know, if you're really into something, Steve Cantwell actually put me onto at one of the soil life summits I was at a couple of years ago was barbecue grade like wood smoking chips,
Really?
and those are, yeah, amazing. So
Wow.
if you're using an expensive living soil and you want some wood chips that are guaranteed to be of very high quality, then that's a good
That's
good little
incredible. I'd
tip.
never heard of that.
So yeah, they're expensive though,
Yeah,
so
of course. Yeah,
so
I've
yeah,
used a few different things. Like I found that's like you said with that the smaller shredded up mediums, like especially something like sugarcane mulch can become quite hydrophobic. It kind of just mats over the top of the
yeah,
soil
exactly, yeah,
and you're
yeah.
not getting that penetration of the water. You can water for an hour and then peel back the layer and it's bone dry. So uh I've found that like my favorite ways of doing it is like a barley straw, bigger pieces, so there's
Mm,
lots of oxygen that comes through. I use my cover crop as a living mulch as much as possible, keeping lots of clover and things in there
yep.
to create that kind of cover on the soil. But going back to rice hulls as well, I've used rice hulls as a mulch too, and I've found that that's been quite good.
Mm,
It's been quite easy and like they're not too expensive to get a bunch of that.
yep.
Um, so so yeah, that's really really cool. And then last question,
Cool.
mate, if I would
Yep.
about watering, um, and I know you mentioned to me before we started that we this could be a deep rabbit hole, but water only and low input systems, um, what are some of the problems that, or like, what's the main couple of issues that people might face if they're just going down a water only or really low input style system? Like what comes to mind with that?
Um, so I'm just gonna have to get you to
It's
go over that question
That's okay.
again.
Yeah,
So
I'm sometimes like I can be a bit vague with the
no,
question, but
no, no, just yeah,
I'm just
hit me
thinking
again
that
and I'll
like
think of a good
yeah, I'm
answer.
thinking in terms of like if you've just bought your soil mix,
Yep.
is it possible first and foremost to just use water
Okay, cool. Yep.
and then what problems might you face long term if that's what you were doing?
Yep. No, this is a good question. All right, gotcha. Yeah, because look, this is probably the key point of difference, I would think, with this kind of my soil mix is distributed around grow stores, like hydroponics
Yeah.
shops around Australia. And you might see it on the shelf next to, say, a cocoa coir, um, you know, hydroponic media, things
Hmm.
like that. This is an organic living soil that, the plants are taking up what they need, uh, nutrient-wise from the soil itself. So in order for this to work well, with mainly just water, you need to have enough soil volume
Mm.
for the plant to be able to access, enough nutrients for, particularly for a whole crop cycle. And it depends on how long, this all depends on how long the crop cycle is, the type of plant, the environmental conditions and everything. But just as a rule of thumb, like we've formulated our mix for sort of around 2 to 4 weeks of veg and 9 weeks of flour.
Hmm.
And that requires a minimum of 50 liters of soil. So if
Yeah,
you're outside of those parameters, you can expect it to become deficient and require supplementation.
true.
You know, interestingly, I get this less these days, but yeah, back when I started, you would see people doing this constantly where they're trying to grow in a 10-liter pot, and it's
Yeah.
all good until you get to about week two, in the flowering stage, and it just completely falls over because there's just not enough
It's being
nutrients left.
outpaced, isn't it? Yeah.
Their biology cannot keep up. There is just at that point, it requires constant supplementation
Mm.
with ionic nutrients. So yeah, 50 liters minimum with those parameters of around 2 to 4 weeks veg and 9 weeks flower. If you got a full season thing going on where you're starting early in the season and you're growing, say, outdoors, and it's just there's no greenhouse or anything, you're just outside, you're going full term, then I would say get into absolute minimum of like 200 liters or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and look, people break these rules all the time, and I always find that really impressive. Like, wow, how'd you do
Yeah.
that? Get
Yeah.
these really healthy plants in smaller pots. But if you want to see some really impressive results, I just can't recommend, you know, setting yourself up for success with adequate soil volume to begin
Hmm.
with,
Yeah.
and just following, best practices with watering and stuff like that. And you'll find that, yeah, absolutely, you can get through a full crop cycle with just water. Um, However, that's a kind of baseline, and you can you can improve results from that baseline by using various biostimulants,
Yeah.
microbial applications, whether it's bacillus, bacteria inoculants, or some more impacted applications, or say boosting, you know, flower specific amendments in the flowering stages.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Anything that's going to, be compatible with the living soil, um, and in balance. You're not feeding too much. I mean, these things are all going to improve your yield and quality, the crop quality potential, from that. But yeah, you can absolutely get a good crop cycle with just water, if you're working within those parameters. Yeah, I had a customer the other day actually reached out, and they had really healthy plants all the way up to like week 3 or 4 of flower, and they're in like 10-liter pots,
Right.
you know. So yeah, um, it's probably that is the main limiting factor for water only.
Yeah.
100% is
Yeah.
just get into big enough volume of soil per plant. You can
Yeah.
get
Cool.
great results. Yeah.
And like your mix is this is the difference between what I was using in a really cheap basic potting mix that I got to deliberately demonstrate that there's nothing in it basically. So then when I
Mm,
went water only, it just suffered extremely very
yeah,
quickly.
exactly.
And yeah, that's the difference between, somebody who's really thoughtfully built a soil that has all the components in there of a healthy living soil that's going to provide that for that. And then, as you said, after the crop cycle, like everybody normally does for any kind of gardening, you want to sort of re-amend or add back the nutrients that you were taken out in the plant or the crop, if it's not all chopped and dropped back on top of the soil and being fed back to the soil. So, that's really interesting, mate. And I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything just lastly, is there anything that's coming up for you that you want to plug or you want to talk about, or where's the best place for people to go and follow your journey or find you other than Easy as Organics?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, probably the best place, either my website, easyasorganics.com.au, or my Instagram, which is just easy as organics. Yeah, we've got a few things coming up. I'm really proud of this new mix that we launched recently with
With
Tad
Tad.
Hussey
Yep.
and Brandon Hudson at KIS Organics. Yeah, it took a lot of work, a lot of trial and error to get it to where it is. So yeah, I think it's a really great thing for growers here to try. And our yeah, our Regenerate nutrient pack I think is an excellent just all-purpose kit that is going to kind of help people to maintain or supplement fertility if you are in small pots or if you are longer season and things like that. I'm sure your mix is probably really good as well. Um, for sure. And look, we are releasing a new product pretty soon. It's a bloom specific top dress product. I
Cool.
won't go into too much detail just yet, but yeah, it's not too far away.
Cool.
Yeah, we just want to be able to provide our customers, growers using our products with everything that they need to get the most out of our soil, essentially. And it's something that I've wanted to do for a really long time, and I just haven't gotten around to it. So yeah, we're finally
I know
finally
what
getting
that's
there
like.
now. Yeah.
No, that's perfect, man. Because I look up to you and Tad and all of those guys very much. So I very much
Thanks.
appreciate your insight and I'm very grateful for your time, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for
Sweet,
having me
man.
on.
Wow, what a conversation. Thank you again to Matt. He is an absolute wealth of knowledge, and I highly recommend you go and check out his products. You know, as somebody who makes products in a sort of similar ilk to Matt, I can vouch for the fact that he really meticulously has gone through and made sure that these products are perfect for the market. And as you heard, he's gone through some extensive work over the years, working with some of the best in the biz, trying to create a living soil mix that works. And I'm keen to go and dive into a few more of the things that he spoke about and to do some more research and learn some stuff. But I really hope you learnt something from this conversation too and enjoyed the deep dive of two soil guys nerding out on some in soil information. So if you enjoy the episode, please consider leaving it a review. And of course, follow the podcast because that is the number one thing you can do to show me your support, to help continue allowing me to do something like this and to bring these conversations to you every single week. So I'm very grateful to you, the listener. I'm grateful to Matt for joining us today. And I'm very excited to see you on the next episode. Take care, thank you, and bye for now.